Matt Ridley, welcome.
Chris, very good to be with you.
You've had the most extraordinary career, so let's go all the way back to the beginning. When you were a student, you actually studied zoology. So what was the interest in that, and take us through that?
I was a keen naturalist as a child. That got me interested in biology. I got very excited about biology as a topic and genetics and things like that, and ended up studying animal behavior, actually, in the wild, bird behavior in particular, the sex life of birds, which was a really interesting little angle of evolution. It's the theory of sexual selection is quite distinct from the theory of natural selection. It produces very different outcomes: flamboyant plumage, song, fun stuff, as opposed to just survival stuff, if you see what I mean. And I've actually gone back to that in my new book, which is coming out next month. It's called Birds, Sex and Beauty. And it's about the argument within evolutionary theory about why peacocks have flamboyant tails and things like that.
Well, we might come back to that at the end of this, but it's on that basis of your interest in science. You don't specialise in zoology, you go on to be a science journalist.
Yes, I love writing and found that to be the science editor of The Economist gave me a ringside seat at the excitement of new discoveries, the chance to write about it, the chance to talk, to indulge my curiosity about scientific topics. I had a wonderful career doing that for many years.
And you start out, obviously, as someone who's interested in the environment, but from a realistic perspective, you saw it in some of your early works as there was reason to be optimistic about things that were happening, with the things that were changing in the world. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I was probably routinely pessimistic, like other people, about the state of the environment when I was young. But it gradually dawned on me that things were getting better in some ways. The wildlife in the area where I lived was coming back. You know, the end of DDT meant that you had peregrine falcons and otters and herons and other species reappearing. And quite a lot of improvements happening as well as deteriorations. And then I came across Bjorn Lomborg's book, The Skeptical Environmentalist. He's now a good friend. And it opened my eyes to the point that we were being told the bad news, but not the good news about the environment. And I eventually ended up writing a book that pointed out this is true for every topic, not just the environment, that actually we've been deluged with the pessimistic side of the world, and we've been told again and again that disaster is just around the corner. And in fact, throughout that period, there have been spectacular changes in human well-being. The most striking example is that half the world population lived in extreme poverty. That's less than $2 a day in today's money when I was born. And now that number is something like 8%. Now, no human being has ever lived through a transformation of human living standards like that. So it's a very special time to be alive. And it's not just that people are wealthier, they're healthier, happier, cleverer, kinder, freer, more peaceful, and more equal as well. More equal, yes. People in poor countries have been getting rich faster than people in rich countries. So it is an incredible time to be alive. That's not to say all is well, and there are things to worry about. And for me, a rational optimist is someone who recognizes that things have got better, but recognizes that they could get an awful lot better still if we adopt the right policies and pursue the right goals.
So why is it, do you think, that the environmental movement and its camp followers are such extreme pessimists about everything? And that's not to say, let's take as read that there are real issues, that the climate is changing, and that if we can, we should be doing something about that. The question, though, then is, what do we do? But this is painted as an existential crisis. This is an end times theology. How do we get there?
Well, there's a long tradition of this in the environmental movement of drawing attention to the bad news and making it sound cataclysmic, from the population explosion to desertification to the retreat of the rainforests to the ozone layer to acid rain to sperm counts. There's an awful lot of attempts to worry people about the environment. Some of them justified, some of them problems which actually turned out to be solvable. And the climate change one came along in the 1980s as one that was always a long way off. And easy to make into a great big global scare. We're going to heat up the world till it's uninhabitable. Now, at first I went along with that, and I thought, well, scientists must know what they're talking about. But gradually I looked into the science, and I found that actually, yes, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, no doubt about that. Yes, we're increasing it. Yes, the temperature's going up, but at a very slow rate. And that's completely consistent with the physics that we know. And the apocalyptic predictions are based on positive feedback effects for which there is very little good evidence. What we know about climate sensitivity, and we now have 40 years of climate change science since the warming started in the mid-80s, what we know is that it is coming in at the lower end of the range. And it's a gentle warming, which is resulting in some species moving further north, particularly warming in the north at night and in winter. So we're getting milder winters in the north of the globe. There's very little effect around the tropics, actually. And as for storms, floods, and droughts, the evidence is clear, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says this. There is very little, if any, measurable effect on the frequency or severity of these things.
That is the thing that completely bamboozles me about this. Now we have turned the weather report every night into a litany of stories about climate catastrophe. And if you read the physical science, and it's 1,000 pages long from the IPCC, they are very, very loath to put attribution onto single weather events. And yet that is the discourse that we hear every single day.
Yeah, the media is far too ready to rush to attribution. And so are politicians, because it's a very convenient excuse for politicians. If you haven't funded your fire department properly in California, or if you haven't made proper flood defences in England, then it's very handy for you to stand up and say, it's climate change. There was nothing I could do about it. That's the problem, I think, is that there's a real dereliction of responsibility going on here. And in addition to that, they are leaving out the other side of the story, which is that carbon dioxide is the food of plants. And if you increase the levels in the atmosphere, plants find it easier to grow. They grow faster, particularly in dry areas where they risk losing water when they're absorbing carbon dioxide. And so there has been a massive increase in green vegetation on the planet. It's approaching 20% more green vegetation after 30 years. That's incredible. That's like a new green continent, twice the size of the continental United States, twice the size of Australia. I mean, that's enormous. It's a gigantic effect. Is this down to carbon dioxide? Yes, the science is now very clear. Most of that effect is from more carbon dioxide, not more warming or more rainfall. It has resulted in a greater increase of crop yields. And a very recent analysis by Ross McKittrick in Canada has shown that the Biden administration's recalculation of the cost of carbon, which massively increased that cost, was wrong because it left out this effect. And if you add this effect back in, the social cost of carbon, as it's called, is very small, if not possibly negative.
Why is it then that we don't just have an environmental movement, but a political class and a media class and an academic and scientific class which is determined to terrify populations?
Well, that's a good question. And of course, bad news sells and good news doesn't. We're more interested in bad news than good news. It's easier to get people's attention with bad news. That's a big part of it. But also there is now a massive vested interest, financial vested interest in pushing climate alarmism. Again, just repeat, this is not to say climate change isn't real. It is. The question is it a really big problem or a minor problem? I think it's a minor problem. But you've got enormous flows of money into research, into activism, and into building so-called solutions like unreliable energy systems, wind and solar, which are creating enormous flows of money that if you can get in on them and you can tap them and you can get a good salary out of them, if not an investment opportunity, then you're home and dry. So that's what's happening, is that we've got an enormous crony capitalist industry growing up around the climate scare. And I think, people who are critical of capitalists for exploiting things need to have a look at this, because on the whole, they're leaving it alone. They're saying the corruption is in oil and gas and things, which I don't think the evidence suggests that it is.
An enormous transfer of wealth from taxpayers through these companies. And also, at the same time, we're seeing our energy systems deconstructed in the name of this. So we're going to make people poorer on all fronts, poorer, colder, unhappier, with the policies that are in place at the moment.
Right. So in the UK, we now have the most expensive electricity in the developed world. Of any country, for domestic consumers and for industrial users, 4 or 5 times what the cost is in America. That cost falls much more heavily on poor people than rich people. Energy budgets are a bigger part of their budget than they are for rich people. And the reason for that is policy cost. It is because we are adding a surplus onto every electricity bill to reward the unreliable energy, the wind and solar energy, with subsidies. And on top of that, we're then having to pay enormous sums for extra grid connections, more pylons to bring the power from the North Sea to where it's needed, and backup systems to operate when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. So, if you've got a backup gas plant operating only occasionally when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, well, why not have the gas plant alone? And then it would be an awful lot cheaper. And then you've got schemes to make even more expensive energy, like hydrogen, which is a ridiculously expensive fuel because you have to make it from electricity, basically, which means that, the whole system at the moment is making our energy system less reliable, less affordable, and more aggressive. The money is going from the poor to the rich at the moment, on the whole.
And you would have thought, again, you were talking about 40 years of climate science. We at least have 25 years now of experience around the world of trying to make electricity systems run on wind and solar. The evidence is in, it doesn't work, it's more expensive. And yet countries like the UK seem to be determined to press the pedal to the metal. It's the same in Germany, which is having a disastrous energy policy, which should be a lesson to the world. Australia is doing exactly the same thing. Why would governments continue on this path when the evidence is so clear that it's the wrong way?
Well, in the UK, I think there's an interesting little wrinkle, which is that for a couple of years after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, renewables were cheaper than gas as a way of making electricity. And indeed, the renewables were paying back rather than being subsidized, because the gas price had gone so high. And under the contract for difference system, when the gas price was high, the renewables would actually pay back. And so ministers and others made a big deal about this. Look, see, we're winning. Now they're cheaper and they're paying back. And for a brief period, they were cheaper. They've gone back to being way more expensive then. And net over the last 10 years, renewables have been far, far more expensive. Now, the government here keeps projecting that they're going to get cheaper, and they do it with a sleight of hand. They say the wind is going to blow more frequently. The capacity, the actual percentage of the time that the wind farms are operating is going to go up. Well, where are they getting that idea from? It's not getting windier. They say that solar power is going to get more efficient, etc. Again, there's no evidence for that. The operating and capital expenditures, they're going to come down. No, they're not. They're going up, if anything. If you take a ship out into the North Sea to mend a wind turbine, your fuel price has gone up. So, of course, it's more expensive to mend it. Why would you think the cost is coming down? So there is an enormous self-deception inside the government in this country and many other countries about this issue. And those of us who've been drawing attention to it have found that we are banging our heads against a brick wall. I've written to endless energy ministers showing them real evidence of real costs going up, not down. And I either don't get an answer or I get a a non-answer, a sort of, a paragraph of waffle.
Do you think the populations are getting it though? Do you think that in the end, what will drive change will be the people will revolt?
Yes, I mean, so in the UK, around the time of the next election, I and everyone else will have had to give up any prospect of having a diesel car. We'll be forced to have an electric one. Any prospect of having a gas boiler to heat our homes. These are going to hurt. They're going to be very expensive, very unreliable, and they're not going to keep you very warm in the winter, these air source heat pumps. And so I think at that point, the electoral calculation will come home to roost. And whichever party is saying net zero is crippling our economy, it's destroyed our chemical industry, it's destroyed our steel industry, it's destroying our aviation industry, it's going to destroy our artificial intelligence industry because of the price of electricity. Whichever party is saying that will do well at the polls. And at that point, the penny will drop even with the bureaucrats.
Just to take you to the scientific community, because it's a community that you're a part of. You start out as a scientist and a science writer. There's, I think, a view that, the world would be a better place if scientists ran it. Now, we ran that experiment during COVID. How would you mark the scientific community in the advice they gave government during that time and the way that we responded to that advice?
I think the scientific community has yet to realize just how much of its reputation it destroyed in the COVID years. The effect is not just within medical science, but everywhere. Trust in experts has been badly damaged because they told us a whole bunch of things with certainty that were wrong. They told us it was not an airborne virus. That was wrong. They told us the vaccine would stop transmission. That was wrong. They told us lockdowns would be brief and would work. They didn't work. And so on. They told us the virus came from a market and not from a laboratory. Well, I've written a whole book showing that actually it's very likely it did leak from that laboratory. Almost certain, I would say now. And they told me that was a conspiracy theory. And I wasn't even allowed to discuss. If I said that on Facebook, that it might have come from a lab in the early years of the pandemic, I would be banned, literally. Now, that kind of censorship, that kind of dogmatic certainty, that kind of monolithic approach to advice, health advice, was very, very damaging to the reputation of experts and scientists. Now, scientists can recover their reputation, and they deserve a good reputation on the whole. Many things scientists do are trustworthy and are reliable, but they can only recover it if they eat some humble pie and come to the public and say, we made some significant mistakes here and we need to learn from them and we need to listen to what you, the public, think of us.
Did you find that time insidious and vaguely terrifying in the fact that you knew that if you said the wrong thing, that you could be cancelled, that you wouldn't be published, that people would threaten your income? Because the thing for me about that pandemic was almost as if Oz steps out from behind the curtain and we see for the first time the kind of people that would like to rule us and the way in which they would like to rule us, up to and including when you can come and go from your own house.
Well, I'd noticed before the pandemic that many scientists and medics in particular had a very top-down view of the world. They thought that the world is basically run by clever people telling stupid people what to do. They don't believe in the wisdom of crowds or the freedom of people to develop their own solutions to problems. And they got their chance to act like that in the pandemic. And yes, it was frightening. And what was even more frightening was that for a while it was popular. We forget it now, but the smack of firm lockdown increased the popularity of politicians everywhere. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Boris Johnson in England.
Daniel Andrews in Victoria. We were the worst of the lot.
Were you? Yeah. And the chickens then came home to roost, and all those people lost their jobs in the end. And I think in retrospect, the public is realizing and has realized that they were wrong to approve this draconian, autocratic, undemocratic, technocratic approach to running our lives. And that we know now from Sweden that a voluntary approach to social distancing without closing the schools would have saved more lives. The data is very clear on that. And that, to me, is a lesson that the technocratic class needs to take on board.
Scar tissue, though, isn't it? And these things, sometimes it takes a long time to know exactly what will come of it. And I think of the three big things of the 21st century, where again, massive mistakes and great damage made: the invasion of Iraq, the global financial crisis, and now COVID-19. We'd seen before that this loss of trust in the institutions, which has now picked up speed to such an extent that the young people today have great distrust in our institutions. So these things are cumulative too, and we don't actually know where they end. I mean, what are your fears about where we appear to be headed with our democracies?
Well, people say to me, "Oh, come on, you've got to trust experts. You drive across a bridge, you don't expect it to fall down. You trust the engineers who built the bridge." And of course, that's right. But there's a big difference between the people who build bridges and live by their results. If they build it wrong and it falls down, they are accountable. Or the people who design airplanes, likewise. And the people who use models to forecast. Economic forecasting, climate forecasting, epidemic forecasting using mathematical models has been comprehensively shown to be very unreliable. And it's not because their models need improvement. It's because these things are complex dynamic systems, which depend very strongly on initial conditions and on feedback effects within them, which makes them genuinely unforecastable. And so a little humility about forecasting the future. There are no experts on the future. Except in the banal sense that we all know the sun is going to rise in the east tomorrow. But on the future of the economy, the future of epidemics, the future of climate, there are no experts on that. And so for me, that's what science has to do. It has to save the reputation of the real engineers who solve real problems by distancing themselves from the modelers who are little better than snake oil salesmen and astrologers.
You've been in the knowledge business your entire life, though. Is this the difference between knowledge and wisdom? That these are the things that we know or that we think that we know, but the wisdom is deeper. It's an understanding of things.
Well, there's a lovely remark that a man called Josh Billings made in the 19th century, which is, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that ain't so. And the best example of that, and this comes from the thing called the Ignorance Project, is that if you ask 1,000 people in the street, has the percentage of the world population that lives in extreme poverty doubled, halved, or stayed the same? In this country and in America, around 65% will say it has doubled. The number of people living in extreme poverty, the percentage of the population living in extreme poverty has doubled. About 5% will say it has halved, and the rest will say it has stayed the same. The 5% are right, the 65% and the 30% are wrong. But it's worse than that, because if you had written those three answers on 3 bananas and thrown them into a cage with a monkey in it, the monkey would pick up the right answer 33% of the time. It would do 6 times as well as human beings at answering a question about human society that is easy to look up on Wikipedia. So, as Josh Billings said, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that ain't so.
What are the things that you draw hope from? Where is it beyond the obvious enjoyment you get out of the work that you do? And we'll come in a moment to return to where you began with zoology. But so what's the sort of the scaffolding on which you build your life?
For me, the topic that I've spent most time thinking about in the last 20 years is probably innovation. Evolution and innovation. These for me, these are the 2 great ideas of the world, and they're essentially the same idea in some sense, because innovation is an evolutionary phenomenon in technology, just as evolution in biology is an evolution in biological systems. And for me, there's actually a rather wonderful new book coming out from a Canadian author making the argument that the big division in science shouldn't be between physics and biology. It should be between the sciences of things that are governed by rules, like physics, and the sciences of things that are driven by history, by path dependence, by an evolutionary step-by-step changing system. So most of social science is like that. Most of the economics is like that. And that actually it's a bit of an accident that we've thought of evolution as a biological phenomenon. It's not. It's much wider than that. Languages evolve. Cuisine evolves. Culture evolves. Clothing evolves. And to understand these systems as a sort of march through adjacent possible things with selection and selective survival as the way they operate. For me, that's the great unifying thing. I don't think that answered your question. I think you asked how I enjoy myself, but that's the idea that I spend a lot of my time.
That's a great idea. And how do you enjoy yourself? You play instruments as well. You're just sort of multi-talented.
Bird watching, walking my dog, fishing.
Well, let's go back then to bird watching, because I know I spent an Australia summer looking out at parts of the bush and seeing the most magnificent bird life in Australia, like the rosellas, the colours that are there, extraordinary. So tell us a little bit about that and your new project.
Yeah, well, as part of this new book, I wrote a chapter about the bowerbirds of Australia. And I went to Queensland and I watched 5 different species of bowerbirds. And these are unique creatures who have invented art. The male in these species builds a bower, a structure usually made of grass stems and things like that, and then he decorates it with coloured objects. The satin bowerbird uses blue objects, anything he can get hold of, blue feathers, blue flowers, but often bits of blue plastic that are lying around, bottle tops and things like that. And the great bowerbird, which I watched, has white objects, but it also has a little strip of green objects and a little strip of red objects. So, I mean, it's an installation. And the great bowerbird arranges it with to change the perspective, with the big items at one end and the small items at the other. And the one I watched had managed to find a plastic toy hand grenade that a little boy had been playing with and was using this as one of the decorations. And this is extraordinary when you think about it. And this is actually just an extension of what happens in a lot of bird species, which is colourful plumage designed not to help you survive. In fact, it probably hinders your survival, but to help you seduce. It's all about saying to the other sex, exactly, I'm gorgeous, you should be convinced to mate with me. And this is a sort of circular argument, because we now don't think it's that the colourful plumage says, I'm strong, I'm going to have strong kids. That's been the conventional idea for a long time. But Darwin didn't think that was right. And I think Darwin's right that that's not what's going on. What's going on is, I'm colourful, and that means I'm sexy. And so your kids are going to be sexy, not strong.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. So it's a circular thing. And so my new book is exploring that idea. And I had this fabulous time in Australia, and I even managed to get to New Guinea and see some birds of paradise, which are off the graph. They are extraordinary creatures.
Extraordinary. So what's the name of the book?
Birds, Sex and Beauty.
Great title. And so when is it out?
It's out next month.
So great to talk to you. Thank you for sparing us the time, so Matt. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyed it very much.